In today's episode, we look at an endearing coming-of-age story, and it's a period piece as well. And by period piece, I mean it's a simpler time that's basically before February, March 2020. So it's a much, much simpler time. Howdy, I'm Jeff Goldsmith, and this is the Q&A. My agenda is simple. Each week, I plan to bring you in-depth insight into the creative process of storytelling. Folks, we have a very cool episode for you today. We have co-writer Dave Sirus with us to chat about his debut feature film, The King of Staten Island. As I'm sure you know, The King of Staten Island is released video on demand, so you could find it from the convenience of your own home and support a film that was, supposed to be coming to theaters, but obviously, due to the times we live in, certainly is not. And it's a pleasurable convenience because in these times under COVID, these uncertain times, it is nice to take a look back at our previous world where we didn't have to worry about such important things like social distancing and masks like we do now. So there is certainly a comforting level of that to the movie, but it's also a funny and fun movie to watch as well. And it was great of Dave to be so generous with his time when talking about his creative collaboration with co-writer and director Judd Apatow, and of course, co-writer and star Pete Davidson. And, he learned a lot on this movie, and he had what seems to be a really great experience. So I'm sure you'll dig this episode. And speaking of things to dig, I hope you stop by www.backstory.net to check out Backstory Magazine. And if you'd like to subscribe, you could use coupon code SAVE5 to save $5 off a subscription for a 1-year subscription. And that'll get you access to, of course, our current issue. It'll give you access to the last year's worth of issues in our archive, which we are expanding beyond the past year, but right now it is the past year. And also, it'll help us prepare as we get ready to release issue 42, which will be our new issue that we have done in these social distance times. So your support is more crucial than ever right now, and it means everything for me, for my podcast listeners to support us. So thanks for considering subscribing to Backstory Magazine. Now, in case you don't know, because it's a very new thing, we also have a YouTube page. So you could see this Zoomcast, which is where it originated from, at Backstory Magazine's YouTube page. And of course, if you're listening the regular way, you're still hearing the audio in iTunes and Spotify. But just for the podcast listeners, in case you didn't know and you want to see me and Dave talk, and watch the interview rather than just listen to it, you could go to the Backstory Magazine YouTube page. But now, without any further ado, let's jump right into the interview with Dave Sirus about his debut feature film, The King of Staten Island. All right, so Dave, welcome, and it's good to have you here to talk about The King of Staten Island.
Thank you for having me. Very honored to be able to talk about this. I could not possibly feel like more of a dick trying to pitch a movie at this point in history.
You're not pitching it. We're going to talk about your process. So you've got a lot of
built-in. I just want to make sure people understand how unimportant this movie is.
There are very many more important things going on in the world. So it's coming out at a turbulent time, but it's also coming at a time where people might want some escapist fiction that takes them certainly away from the events of the world before they return back to them, we hope. So I think it'll serve that purpose because that's what entertainment always does. I want to talk about your breaking in story. Did you go to school for writing? Where did you study and what did you study?
I went to Syracuse for illustration, which at least I was able to partially use because I drew a bunch of the tattoos in the movie.
Oh, that's cool.
But no, I started doing stand-up in high school, like a senior in high school, and then I did it through college and just sort of continued trying, not consistently like all the time. It was hard, but yeah, since then I just sort of got into sketch comedy and writing and just trying to do whatever kind of comedy just, worked best for me. Videos, YouTube stuff, sketches, live stuff.
Did you draw the Obama tattoo in the movie? Because that tattoo was pretty amazing.
Yeah, that was me.
Yeah, just for people that haven't seen it yet, and I hope you do go see it, you could watch it on demand. Basically, there's a very messed up Barack Obama tattoo where just, Scott's character wants to be a tattoo artist, and his talent is questionable at different points in the movie.
Trying to draw a tattoo that's bad in a way that looks unintentional is so hard.
Yeah.
I drew that Obama so many times. Like there was the number of tattoos that I drew just trying to figure out what the magic is of drawing a bad tattoo that doesn't look on purpose was it's so much harder than I imagined it would be.
What year did you graduate Syracuse?
2000.
Okay. And so if you want to tell us, what did you do between 2000 and what I know to be your writing directing debut with your documentary Archie Black, which is a mockumentary, and you could give us the pitch on that, but just tell us what you did after graduating, because everybody has a different path and it's always interesting to hear.
Pretty much nothing. I did stand up. Nothing really went particularly great. I went to LA and I started doing just sort of stand up there. Nothing that really translated to anything big. Just doing shows and most of them going well, but not really growing. I was in a sketch group called uh, uh, I was in Slow Children Crossing. I was the white guy of the sketch group, so which means I always had to play like a cop or a slave owner or something because it was always sketches written by the other people in the group, and I was the one white guy. And
Where is that
then
group? Where is that group located?
L.A.
I mean, but
That's
what
where
part? I'm from LA. I mean, I live in
uh,
LA.
no one. We didn't really all live in the same neighborhood or anything. I lived in Hollywood.
I mean, where would it perform? Like, what space would they use?
We did IO West. We did a lot of different shows. We toured. We did the Austin Out of Bounds Festival. We did Seattle. We did a lot of just sketch, touring sketch, and we had a weekly show once at on Hollywood. I forget which place it was, but we did a lot of places like that.
Okay.
And one of them was Brett Butler, who was the voice of Dr. Quinn on C-Lab. And that was really fun. And then I started doing YouTube stuff when that sort of started getting bigger, both sketches and like man on the street ambush interviews, which went well. They got a lot of traction when I would do them against hate groups. That actually worked out really well. uh, and then I did this like small mockumentary. I just had the idea of just trying to do like an anthology that was sort of like the Aristocrats, but with roasting. The idea was that you would make up a fictional character of the worst comedian who ever lived, and then just have other comics just talk about him and in this heightened kind of reality. And for some of them, I would write what they say, and for others, the comedians would just use real stories for other comics that they hated.
That's really funny. I mean, for anyone that hasn't seen The Aristocrats, it's definitely worth checking out. And so you did this in 2014. How long was your shoot? What was your budget? What was your biggest lesson from making your first film?
There really wasn't a budget because I did everything myself. I just did literally everything myself, and I paid a few comics, but basically it was just me trying to throw something together and see if I could somehow, with no money, uh, do something that was usable. And I definitely learned things from it. There's definitely a lot. There's so many different things to consider when you're trying to throw together a project like that. And like I said, this was basically a no budget movie. It was nothing but my time, so it was a lot of work. And it was also it was you're also relying on a lot of other people when you're letting the bigger comics kind of write their own material, because you don't want to be held responsible for something that's like not yours. But it's like the Aristocrats in that way. I just sort of wanted to give them room to just use some of these stories that all these comics have about the worst monster they ever worked with, basically.
I'm sure there were plenty of stories. So where could people see it if they wanted to see it these days? Is it
I don't
available
think
for
they
stream?
can.
No,
I
it's
don't
not.
think they
It's
can.
not online anywhere.
No, not right now.
Interesting. Okay.
It was
Are you ever going to
DVDs, but
plan to put it online?
maybe.
Did it play any film festivals?
No, no, no. I had it. I sold it as DVDs basically at shows, and
Interesting.
I put it online for a little while, but it's not really. I mean, it's not really what I'm trying to get out right now. It's something I might even redo professionally at some point.
Interesting. That's fascinating. Well, so I think if I'm reading it right, your SNL run began in 2015, the year after that. Is that
Hmm.
correct?
Yeah, something like that. Started working
And
at
talk about
SNL.
that, because that's a big deal for a writer. It's an iconic show. What was your process like for getting staffed on Saturday Night Live?
Well, basically, I got that job because uh, SNL was really happy with the job I did writing for Pete at the Justin Bieber roast. Pete and I wrote pretty much all the jokes, almost every joke you see at the Bieber roast. I wrote about half of them, and they were just happy with that. So they let me write a packet for them, and I got hired off the packet, and I got to be there. It was very lucky for me that I was there during the 2015-16 season, because that was an election year. So I got to do what I was best at in terms of sketch writing, which was contribute to the kind of cold opens, the political sketches, writing, jokes that are said by, that was the best part, that I got to write jokes that were famously said, by people playing Larry David, Bernie Sanders, Hillary, Trump. Like, so I got to write jokes, Ted Cruz. That was really good that I got to at least do what I was best at, which was the kind of political commentary as opposed to like classic sketch writing. And I was also brought in to assist in all the writing of all the update features. That Pete and I would, vast majority of his update features we wrote together.
When did your relationship with Pete start? How far back do you guys go?
When he was 18, we met doing stand up, and then he had his first like acting job. So he came to LA, and when he was in LA for acting, I was one of the only person he knew through a close mutual friend. So we started hanging out and got along really well. And then when he was being given offers to try to write something for the first time, he tried writing with other people, friends of his also, and then we tried it, and it just worked really well. It just came out very quickly. It just worked, and we were immediately get interest in projects we were writing that would have been produced had he not been hired at SNL.
That makes sense. I mean, being hired on SNL, just to go back for a second, then I want to get to today's film. Tell us about what you gleaned from their process, because this is your first paid gig, basically, and it's a huge one. What was it like on a weekly basis to be under that deadline, and how did your writing process and your craft evolve?
I mean, SNL is a very sort of Wild West environment where it's a lot of different people, and they're all just sort of left to their devices to try to adapt to the situation. And it's certainly one of the things you're going to do is it really, there's a lot about discipline and about just being able to generate a ridiculous amount of material in a very short amount of time. It's tough because, basically you have one day to do the writing portion of the show, and that's very different than most shows. So it's really just about sort of survival. It's about
Sorry to interrupt. Is that one day because the other days you're basically outlining and stuff like that?
Monday, you pitch your idea. Tuesday, you write it. Wednesday, everyone reads the sketches and decides which ones are the best ones. Thursday, you rewrite it. Friday, you rehearse. That's the week.
Yeah.
So, you don't have really time. You're not really expected to write things over time. It's sort of just, everything's very sort of, let's try this right now. Because you have to have the host on board. It has to, speak to the host. It has to help them. So yeah, it's a much shorter window than most any other show would be.
That's cool.
Unless you're
And
like
so,
talking about like Fallon or something where it's like daily.
right. And so you were on there for one season. Is that
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah, I
Okay.
was a staff writer for one season.
And so after that, is that when you and Pete started coming up with the King of Staten Island? When did the idea first begin? If it was before that, I'd love to know that too.
Pete and I wrote our first script before he was on SNL. And then that actually got interest from Judd to do a blind script together, which also got canceled because Pete got SNL. So then after that season I was there, we were talking to Judd again about a new idea for a movie, which we kind of bandied back and forth and ended up not really working out just for scheduling and just different things. And then when that was over, Pete and I wrote another script called Mommy. That was like a more of a straight comedy we were writing for another studio that didn't get picked up after we sold it, but Judd read it and really liked it and said, "Hey, let's try this again. Let's start from scratch and write another script together. And this time, instead of sort of just arbitrarily, assigning us to a storyline, let's really build something off of what we have here. Let's really build what's an appropriate movie based on Pete's real story."
And
And
so,
that was Judd's thinking, to just let's really dive in. Let's really like get into this and really dive into the truth about what we can, and see what we can use from the what's really happened to Pete and who he really is.
Well, so in that regard, like, what is the status of Mommy, and could you pitch it to us? Is it something that could still get made?
No, because Mommy, while there's really no elements of Mommy that made it into our script, you couldn't really do both. Mommy was like more of a straight comedy, basically about a guy trying to get his mom laid, about a guy whose mom hasn't dated in over 10 years, like Pete's real mother. And it was like just like this sort of almost slapsticky idea of just like the of him and his sister just trying to get their mom laid and just trying to find the right guy for mom, and finally found him. Wait a second, this maybe this guy's not good for mom. Yeah, it was very, very, very different than what we wrote, but you couldn't really do both.
Right. I could see how one influences the other. You know, something I forgot to ask earlier that I just want to get before we fully move into King of Staten Island. What was your favorite skit that you made it through on SNL? And what was the one that still haunts you to this day where it just didn't go the way that you wanted?
I mean, honestly, my favorite thing that I ever wrote for SNL was the trans bathroom update that Pete did. That was the first update that was like really mine, and it's the only thing I ever wrote at SNL that did so well at the initial table that there was just no question that it was going to be on the air.
It was great. I
Um,
could still remember it.
Thank you. Yeah, that was one I was really happy with. Um, as in terms of like things that I wasn't happy with, I mean, the truth is
Just like
that's
things,
why
you know, they inevitably
well, that's
go
why they weren't
wrong.
on the show. That's why they weren't on. I mean, they weren't on the show.
Okay.
Would be the ones that would be the problem. I mean, believe me, I wrote a lot that
Is
didn't
there
get
one that
on the
comes
show.
to mind that you really wished made it, but just never did, that you could tell us about? Something that never made it? Because you just
I
couldn't work it
mean,
out for whatever reasons? It's just always fun to hear those left turns.
well, I mean, we had a lot of sketches that could have been on the show and they just weren't.
Right.
I think there was one sketch that I actually was doing with Jay Farrow with Pete as Macklemore that was just about Drake kidnapping rappers and keeping them in a dungeon to ghostwrite for him. That was just like such a dumb, fun sketch that almost made it.
That's really
Where
funny, actually.
we just had every cast member just playing another washed up rapper in this dungeon together. And it was just such a fun idea that like that did well, but yeah, it just didn't make it to the show. Stuff like that. I mean, I wrote update features that I thought could have made it in that didn't, like the idea of a just a character who has a memory disorder, has a short-term memory disorder, and he's trying to explain what it's like having to deal with that uh, in life, but he just keeps getting shocked by the fact that Colin and Che are next to him. He keeps forgetting that they're there, and it's a very dumb, easy sketch. Or like I had one about Batman that I really liked. Just that's basically just Batman talking about the fact that Superman is the worst person in the world for what he chooses to use his powers to help.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Batman too. I mean, let's face it, Batman is the biggest corporate criminal in America. He
He
embezzles more money than anyone who ever has in like corporate. I mean, he embezzled enough money from his own companies, which is, by the way, publicly traded. So he's stealing from stockholders to buy a goddamn orbiting satellite. No one has ever embezzled that much money.
I will say in Bruce Wayne's defense that the Wayne Corporation could still use that satellite for legitimate business. But you're right. You're right. He's not being honest with the board. So you definitely have a case that should have been litigated amongst geeks around the world, and I'm sorry that it wasn't.
Yeah.
I know a lot about Apatow's process, and he's very, very big into rewriting and getting it right and going
Yeah.
back and stripping things down over and over. We do this in a non-spoiler section first, and we'll get into the spoilers after a bit when we make a spoiler announcement. But just talking loosely about his process, what did you glean about Judd Apatow's writing process, specifically rewriting? Because I know that he could sometimes be brutal when necessary to really not become too beholden to things.
Yeah, no, that's a big part of the way Judd writes is that, we were right. People talk about the script, and I'm like, there was no script. We wrote 1,000 scripts. We were every day the script was different. No matter how much we had and how much happy with, we kept rewriting everything because there's a certain amount of like freshness that Judd as a director knows how to generate. He knows how to keep everything feeling real and new with the actors. And the idea is that you kind of rewrite things and practice things over and over again until the dialogue itself isn't ever that it doesn't have to be that specific. It's about getting the actors to a place where they're living in this role, and just acting honestly in a moment is going to get the point across you want. So it's, every single day we were rewriting every joke, pitching new ideas, trying to just find new ways of making everything feel real, because there's that idea that, like, if you just keep if you keep cycling through this idea in your head, you're going to stumble upon a better one.
That makes sense. I mean, so you said that there wasn't a draft. I mean, surely there was
Oh,
some
man, there
sort of a
was.
draft.
But
Yeah,
when people
like
say, what was the script? I'm like, there was never one script.
right.
Every week, the script changed, because that's how much discipline there was to just constantly rework it, constantly look at it again and say, how can we make this better? How can we change this? What's going to, it's so much of it is just about feel. It's about trusting, instincts, and about trying to make something that, like 1,000 different points that you're all trying to line up together in a way that's like impossible to wrap your head around. So while there was a script, when people would ask about it, it's like the script ends up being whatever you saw on camera,
right.
because the amount of revisions meant that, like, there was never one specific draft that became the movie. It became, there was a script when the movie started, and then there's where it was when we finished filming, because every day we were changing something.
Well, so how would you guys write, the three of you? Would you share drafts? Would you meet together like to do an outline in the beginning? Because
Yeah, we did a lot of brainstorming together,
and what
along
year
with
was that when you started?
2018.
Okay.
So, like, towards the later part of 2018, we were meeting together in New York. Judd flew out for that, along with Barry Mendel, our producer, and a lot of the other people who were, very integral to this. So then we started. We basically brainstormed the basic idea, and then Pete and I wrote just a completely finished draft of the movie, gave that off to Judd. Judd would then take that, write a new, completely different draft of it, and then I would look at that and say, okay, and going down every page, just say, here's what I think of this, just putting notes on notes. And then from that, you just and then, he would write another draft that would integrate some of the things that I suggested.
Okay, wait. I'm
And
going to
then we
stop
would
you
just,
just because it's going to get very complicated. So tell me this: how long was your outline period before you started writing? Would you
I
say the
don't,
brainstorming period?
I mean, at least a month, at least
Okay, and what was
two,
your
like a
document
week.
like? Was it like a bullet point document? Was it note cards? Tell us about your original design document before you started screenwriting.
Well, we spend a lot of time in the outline. The idea is that, you breathe, you live and breathe the outline until the dialogue stage is actually going to be fairly simple,
Right.
because you're so accustomed to what has to happen in this moment that by the time you write the dialogue, it just kind of falls out. Which isn't really my usual writing style, because I'm primarily a joke writer. So it was different for me to have to have that much trust in the material, that you can trust that the actors are going to find the places you need, because so much of my writing is just so much about just meticulously wording things. So I had to really adapt to that, and also the same way, find places where my meticulous wording could still fit in and be something that was not, that they're not going to play with too much
Well, so
in
one
some
thing
points.
that writing. Sorry to interrupt. Keep going. Keep going.
No, yeah. So we spent months on the outline, and then we spent months just writing lots and lots of different versions of this movie.
Well, so
And
wait, so stopping you there for a second, because you talked about the process of sending the script back and forth. It's always interesting to see how writing teams do that, and who is the keeper of the primary draft, and how you're tracking notes. I know it's really geeky, but just for the writers out there, how were you tracking? Okay, Pete came up with this idea, Judd came up with this idea, you have this idea. They're all three different ideas for the same scene. Who's keeping track of which one's going to stick? And is there a draft that's like in the hierarchy above the drafts that you're sending around, where you're making the official agreed on changes? Because it could get very messy and tricky to track all those notes.
well, I mean, in our case, we had a director who was also a co-writer. So that automatically means that Judd is the person who is going to make those decisions about what's going to stay, along with a lot of input from Barry Mendel, as well as our executive producer, Judah Miller, extremely talented comedy writer as well, and Ricky Velez, one of the actors. He was brought in as a co-producer, so he was one of the people that it was basically me and Ricky and Judah just sort of bouncing ideas around all the time, nonstop, just trying to find different jokes. Every one of us was writing for this movie, and it was that's sort of the process Judd has, where you want to have that organic kind of everyone's going back and forth. So but what really happens is Judd is in charge because, as I learned, this is the first time I've been part of a movie. I've written a couple of scripts, but this is the first thing that got made, and I found out that, Judd, apparently thought he knew more about what it takes to make a profitable movie than I do. Who knows where he got that idea?
Amazing.
Right?
The audacity, the audacity.
Yeah.
But it's
no,
interesting though. Like,
that's what it was about, is trusting him and being like, this is a guy who really knows this.
But within the software, were you using a track changes function just so that he could see what new stuff you added? How were you keeping track of your changes? Because I've heard that could become quite a mess sometimes.
Speaking of mess, I mean, what it really was is first I would write a script in Final Draft, and then I would give it to Judd, and then you would see like some parts were unrecognizable, some parts were fairly the same. There's a scene in the movie, without giving too much away, one of the scenes that is one of the earliest scenes that did not change particularly much throughout the process was the scene with Action Bronson, for example. When you see that movie, you can say like that's a scene that did not have as much of like the changes, just because it was sort of a lot of things hinged on it. So it's sort of, that was something that I wrote early on that kind of, that wasn't one of the parts that was completely broken down as much as others. But I would get a script, Judd would then send back a completely new, just written script, and then I would, on my iPad, I would do handwritten notes on that script all over it. And I would just handwrite.
Sorry to interrupt. Type. Using what? How were you handwriting on the script? It wasn't Final Draft at that point, was it?
On the PDF.
Okay, so you were just using PDF enabling software.
Handwriting on a PDF, all these basically, and writing basically alts for every joke. I would write multiple alts of every opportunity for a joke or a line that I just thought I could contribute something to.
And again, just to be the geeky writer, I'm curious, did you ever consider using the notes function inside of Final Draft so that you weren't doing a different format? Was that ever used? Okay, interesting.
Well, that was later.
Oh, okay.
That was later, when later, and especially when we were actually starting to film, then we would do it that way, where you would just I would just make changes, make sure they're in a different color, so that what the differences are, and so that you could see what my suggestions were, because that made
track changes.
We're a little bit further along. Yeah, even though I don't like track changes, I don't use those. I just change the color. I find it too annoying. I found I found using the red automatic track changes too annoying to be able to, for whatever reason. I found it annoying because it prevented you from doing certain things that we need to do in the moment, that I was like, it's just easier for me to just change the color, and then I could use different colors to show different generations of changes. I know it sounds weird, but I just found myself annoyed by the process, and I found it, I'd rather just change the color to show you what I changed.
That makes sense. So you would write PDF notes, and then he would get those back, and somehow Apatow is keeping track of what he likes and what he doesn't, and presumably a different draft that he's keeping separate, so that you guys aren't always writing over each other, so that there's like one draft you're circulating and one draft that you've got like going in a different direction. Sorry about the phone.
And also talking about, like, we're sitting at a board, we're at the Apatow, which is Judd's office. We're sitting at a boardroom. We've got the cork board of all the scenes on note cards. We're doing that whole process, and then Judd, me and Judd and Judah or Barry, we would talk, and we would have all these discussions about, like, what should happen here? What should happen next? Or we need to find a scene that accomplishes blank, and that would be my new assignment. So find a way of making this scene do this. Find a way of making sure that at the end of this page, he's here, that sort of thing. Make sure, how are we going to get these two people in this room in a believable way that's going to show this, that it's like that, just that's the process. Yeah.
And again, geeky question. What did you learn about his outlining process with note cards? Because writers sometimes have everything from different colors to depict different emotions or characters, or they sometimes have a minimum or maximum of how many note cards they'll allow per scene or per act. So yes, I'm getting very geeky on note
I
cards,
saw
and
none
I
of
would just
that.
love to hear it.
There was nothing like that. It was just literally the process of ordering things, of just keeping things in order and saying, these are the scenes we have. What are we going to do with these? And the note cards were just simply showing scenes. It was just, that's a scene. We're going to have to plan. That's going to be a look. Because then you're also
Okay.
just staying for the location and stuff. It wasn't anything that in depth. Just like we had all the actors we were looking up, you know, with their faces on a board. It's funny. I got to tell someone who did not get cast, but fairness, the scene they were looking at him for got cut anyway. It was actually a character that I had written in the hospital that was just supposed to be it's just a character I really want to use for comedy, of just guy obviously trying to get painkillers at a hospital. You know, I just wanted to have the fun, you know, just sort of like watching someone clearly bullshitting a nurse. And like a friend of mine, we were looking at different comics, and a friend of mine, I was like, hey, I saw your face in my my weekly like booklet of people we're looking at. He was like shocked because he just read for it, and he's not even someone who was like that big an actor. So like, even though we didn't hire him, it was like, I was like, oh wow, this is like a big, I'm like, I'm glad, like, it was like, it let him know that his agents were working for him. It let him know that like he actually was doing better in the industry than he thought he was, because he wasn't getting hired. But I'm like, no, you're like, you're someone we're like considering. So like, obviously you're at a level. I mean, and I said, I was like, we're going to go with Joe Mackey instead, but I want you to know that you were absolutely considered.
That's
And I'll
awesome.
say his name, Dan Perlman. Funny guy.
Good for Dan Perlman. I like it. I like it.
Yeah.
He'll get in the next Apatow. Now,
He
so
will.
your own personal writing habit for your craft, what do you consider more important when you're sitting down to write a screenplay page? The hours of your schedule, or a page count that you're trying to hit per day? How do you operate on a daily basis just when you're writing solo?
I've never, ever thought about it that mathematically. I've never said I need to write a certain number of pages per day. Pete does. That's how Pete thinks, actually.
How many
Pete's
how
the
many
kind of guy.
pages does Pete like?
No, I just mean that like when we would write, you know, Pete would be very driven, and he would be like, let's come on. He would say like, let's write 10 pages today. And of course, but Pete's always, he's extremely ambitious. I would be the one to be like, that's a lot of pages in one day. Let's try, but it was always just sort of it was just about motivation for him. It was just about like, let's do this. He was just so into it that he would want to, and other scripts we've had. Whereas it's actually true. Yeah. Pete thinks in terms of pages. I think in terms of hours.
So how many
I'm
hours do
thinking
you
of
like to put in?
as many as I have.
Okay. Well, I mean, some writers have a set schedule is really what I'm getting at. Some people are
No,
morning
no,
writers versus night writers, or they do a certain
nah,
amount of hours and they say that they're done. So you're not that dogmatic, it sounds like.
no. I mean, I like to get things done. I find that the process of writing is an extremely uh, difficult one. I think that if you love writing, if you love it, I question you, because I feel like good writing, at least with comedy, from my perspective, it should hurt. It should feel like it takes a chunk of your soul out of you. That's how much you should be putting into it. Like I describe making yourself write when you're not inspired, like pulling yourself out of a depression. It hurts so much. It's possible, but you hate it. Like just a certain level of manicness I need to get myself to really focus and write well, that it's like it's not fun to push yourself there. It's a level of concentration that is like it's like a feat. You have to really like force yourself to do it. So that once I'm there, I want to use it as long as I can before it runs out. Because like once you get yourself to that place, you can really work. But like getting there is not easy. And I've done so many times where I have to write on command, especially for like Triumph or Roast or something, where you have to just sit there and just crank it out. Same thing with the script. It's not easy to just get yourself to that place mentally. Maybe some people are. I know that there's definitely writers out there who are just always there, and I feel sorry for them because it sounds like hell to have your mind be that rushing all the time. But yeah, It's hard to describe. It's, you know, I forgot who the writer was that, you know, but some famous novelist once described it that, you know, writing is a terrible thing. The teeth decay, you know, your body suffers because it's this thing you have to do. I mean, look at George Martin. You know, 10 years he's been trying to write Winds of Winter, the next Ice and Fire novel. And you can hear it when he talks about it that, like, he loves this so much, but it's killing him. It's like having a
But
child who's
yeah,
poorly behaved.
who's a tough delivery, I guess would be the way to say it.
Yeah.
You brought it up a second ago. I just got to give you kudos. I absolutely loved the Triumph, the Insult Dog work that was done during the 2016 election.
Thank you.
And I'm hoping we could see Triumph in 2020 because we really do need Triumph back.
Oh, we already shot something that'll be up
Good.
soon.
Good. Good.
I think I'm not supposed to specifically say what
it's
it is.
It's pretty presumptive he would come back, and I think we need more Triumph now. Than
yeah,
ever
Triumph.
Before.
We just did something with Triumph that
Great.
is really funny. I'm really happy with. And
Well,
there's
so
other stuff that'll
go
be
into
coming
what
out
you were
in the
saying a
future.
second ago about the difficulties. What do you do when you get writer's block? How do you battle it? Because especially obviously in Saturday Night Live on a schedule like that, there's no time. And something like this, when you're doing rewriting all the time, I guess you get into the groove of rewriting so much. But what do you do when you get writer's block? If you get it? How do you battle through it?
I mean, I don't know if I've ever experienced what I thought of as writer's block. I just sort of, sometimes you just don't have it. Sometimes you just don't have that in you, and sometimes you do. And so it's just about, like, you know, if you can't beat yourself up. You can't. I think the most important thing with writing, because creativity and depression come from the same part of the brain, I think people need to remember that if you beat yourself up, it's not going to fix anything. In fact, thinking about yourself at all is always the wrong direction. And the worst thing you can do if you're having trouble is start talking about is just start internalizing it and thinking, like, I'm doing a bad job, I need to do this. I think you need to leave yourself. You need to be in that environment. And I think I would say that, like, you know, one of the things Judd did while we were writing this was he had me read a whole bunch of David Milch's writing. David Milch, the creator of NYPD Blue and Deadwood.
Yeah, excellent writer.
And I think that I would learn something from him, you know, when you're in a moment where you don't really know what to do, which is that, like, the world you create is a world. And I would say if you have trouble writing something, then you need to have a better understanding of this world that you're living in that moment, and just have a better understanding of what honestly would happen here. How can we use this? And I think, like with David Milch, he was all about, like, it's going to come much easier when you truly embody that world, when that world is truly in you and it's fully fleshed out. At that point, the writing should just happen on its own. It's like you should create an environment that is so real to you from that the actual dialogue is inevitable.
That makes sense. And I think that's sound advice. I'm curious about the influence of, if there were any coming of age stories that kind of had an influence on you. I mean, obviously there's everything from the younger teenage coming of age stories, and this is a 20-something coming of age story. Were there any movies or books that kind of influenced you during this process?
I don't know if I'd specifically say any one movie was an influence during this process. But as a writer, most of my influences are comic book based.
Okay.
Most of what I care about, what's really affected who I am, comes from comedy and comics. And I think, like, when you're a very isolated kind of child, comic books really appeal to you because it's about the idea that you can be something else than what everyone is telling you are. And I think that was a big part of my creative kind of childhood and where I come from. I mean, if we're talking about coming of age and we're talking about movies that we learn from with this, like, yeah, there was really no one film that I looked at and said, this is the kind of movie I want to make. We certainly knew that there were other movies that did a good job of fictionalizing a real, true emotional story like Big Sick, but it was I
Which
can't
Apatow
say.
produced, obviously.
Of course, yeah, which is, a great movie that did very similar thing with Kumail. So yeah, I would be lying if I said there was a specific movie that I was looking at while making this and thinking this is what I want it to be like, because you have to understand, I am primarily a joke writer. If it was up to me, I would have made just nonstop dick jokes, and I would never have been able to pull off kind of emotional reality, the rawness that this movie actually has, because that's something that only someone with Judd's kind of experience could handle of this real life material, even though like I think I understand Pete as well as anyone alive does. And that's why I was able to be helpful in many ways as well as just as a joke writer.
That
Because
makes
I think
sense. Just last question before we get into the spoilers. What was your budget and schedule once it got the green lit? And do you remember it finally getting the green lit? If you started writing in 2018, when did it get the green lit and when did it go into production? And then your budget and schedule.
well, I mean, a lot of that was all Judd's end. I I'm not going to say the budget just because I don't want to be wrong in case I am.
That's fine.
I don't know what the rules are with that. Because and I don't know what the literal final line was. I
Don't
have a
sweat it. Don't
ballpark.
sweat it. When do you
But
remember getting
yeah,
green lighted?
I don't know if I'm supposed to, say what it was or what. The green light came fairly easily because it's Judd, and Judd has his own discretionary budget. He has his own relationship with Universal, so it was, we were able to get the budget off, one of the drafts of the script that, of course, was very different than the one we finally did for that exact reason, that because nothing doesn't change day to day. But the studio seemed happy with the script. I can't tell you when. I assume would have definitely had to be early 2019, but something like that. And we knew that things were moving forward, and that was great. That means, all right, we're flying back to LA. I'm gonna set up in the Appa Tower, and then we started having the real work of really developing this. And then I started also splitting my time between the writing and the tattoos. I devoted an enormous amount of time to learning about tattoos and to be able to draw the perfect bad tattoo. I mean, the amount of work that went into that Obama tattoo, the amount of different bad tattoos that I drew, I cannot even begin to explain.
Well, and there's also a scene
So-
where Pete's character Scott is trolling somebody in a tattoo parlor who just has the worst tattoos, that are kind of racist and just
Yep.
crazy. And
I drew those
that was a
too.
really funny scene too.
I did draw that racist tattoo, and I'll tell you why. If I did not draw the Grim Reaper with a Confederate flag cape, we would have had to pay the person who originally made the Grim Reaper Confederate flag tattoo, who I assume is racist.
Sure.
And I'm like, I would much rather draw my own Grim Reaper Confederate flag.
For
Now,
comedic purposes, you don't even have a copyright issue because it's transformative media. So you're safe there. You're safe there. But okay, well,
and to be fair, we didn't actually have like a specific Confederate flag.
I know.
Grim Reaper. I just mean that like we could have been like,
Yes.
they're out there.
Yes,
It's not like there was no like specific I was basing it on, but it was just the idea that it's like I would rather make my own racist tattoo than have to go find a racist tattoo and pay for it.
I was very surprised that in the movie Scott's character didn't get his ass kicked in that scene, but it was a very funny scene.
Yeah,
but so what was the schedule? How long did it shoot for?
We shot for, I believe, 10 weeks.
Okay.
And Monday would start at 6 a.m. because, of course, whenever you're done that day, you can't start up again for 12 hours. You got to give people time to sleep. So if you start at 6 a.m., hopefully you're done by 6 p.m., which means you can do 6 a.m. the next day. But sometimes you're not done until 8 p.m., which means you can't do it till 8 a.m. the next day. So Monday starts at 6 a.m., and then by the time it's Friday, it's 5 p.m. sometimes.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Because you got to wait 12 hours after the last time.
No, I know. I mean, that makes sense. And, it's really important for crew to be able to not only sleep, but drive home as well and everything else. So that's wild. Right. I mean, I guess that's good that you guys were doing it properly and paying the overtime as needed and just moving it up. That's actually an interesting process I have not heard.
I mean, that's where the budget went for this movie. It was in the fact that Judd is professional and he treats everyone on a set professionally and he doesn't skimp. I mean, we've all been, we all know the stories of like the kind of sets where people are just losing their minds because everyone's got so many different responsibilities and it's just crazy. And everyone is, one PA has to do so many things. Whereas our movie, no, everyone was a pro, knew what they had to do. I mean, pretty much everyone except me. Everyone knew exactly where to be at every moment. The food was, there was no skimping. There was, we got Robert Elswit as our director of photography. We got all these real professionals to really make sure that nothing was ever half-assed.
Well, so we're going to get into the spoiler section. So YouTube folks and also podcast listeners, if you have not yet seen The King of Staten Island, go rent it. You could see it on VOD now. It's been released everywhere. And then come back because we are now going to talk about the spoilers. Obviously, I think the place to start that's really obvious is that in Pete's real life, his father was a firefighter who died in duty, and that affected his life. And that's what the character of Scott has going for him as well. What were some of the conversations you had with Pete about capturing that loss and how it put him in a sense of stasis for so many years, the way that, is emulated through Scott?
Well, what we had to do was just open up every painful memory he had. And, we all know that Pete is very open, very vulnerable about, what he's been through and what he still goes through. And it's not like he ever thought that he deserved sympathy for it. It's just, this is who he is and he doesn't want to hide it. And we had to really talk about everything. The day his dad died, what happened, what mistakes were made in terms of helping him deal with it, what, the idea that he was treated like he feels a bit like a guinea pig, as a, because it was just this an extremely high profile historical tragedy that everyone sort of wanted a piece of.
You're talking about 9/11, obviously.
Yeah, 9/11. And, just the fact that, like, you see Pete and he's shaking hands with George Bush and he's having to stand up at 8 years old in his football uniform while his coach improvises a speech. And it's just this, that your dad dies and then you just become the focal point of this media storm. Michael Strahan carrying him on his shoulders in the beginning of a Giants game. It's a very, very bizarre thing for someone who was so screwed up by his dad's death at the time to process. I mean, how
to that effect, actually, it kind of made me curious because, interestingly, in The Big Sick, they really did go through not the verbatim of what happened, but pretty damn close, because a lot of that had happened to Kumail and his wife, obviously, and they co-wrote it together. Was there ever a conversation about having it more focused kind of on Pete in the same way that The Big Sick was made, in which Kumail was playing a very close version of himself? And, in the movie, his father does not pass away in 9/11. And I was just curious if there was ever a draft where it was a little closer to Pete than that.
No, there were certain things that we never even considered doing. We never considered making him a comedian. We never wanted it to be about 9/11, because if it was, that opens up all these other responsibilities. You can't fictionalize anything if you're invoking 9/11, and we didn't want to make this about 9/11. We didn't, I don't know if I wouldn't use the word exploit it, but we just didn't want to. We didn't want to make it like we were trying to say, hey, you should watch this movie, because
I just mean redirecting it more towards.
I mean, it was about him. It was about this very small story about how Scott Davidson's death affected his family. And we didn't want to introduce the specter of the historical nature of it, because it doesn't matter how Scott died. Whether it was a national, international historical tragedy or just something that only this family knew about, it affected them all the same.
Yeah.
And I think there was something really interesting to me about exploring that, like, everything about this is the same except for that. Why does that change how we see and process it?
That makes sense. And I guess having that distance allows for more exploration and more fictionalizing without having to be so cognitive of the real history of Pete's life as well. It allows him to expand a little, which I'm sure made the process a little less painful, I would hope, for him. Speaking of pain, interestingly, you have your movie open with a suicide attempt. And
Yeah.
that was very unexpected. I thought it was a really good scene. I thought Pete was great, you know, his performance in it. And it shows you a very dark point to try and recover for the next 2 hours, 18 minutes or so of the movie. And I'm curious, was that always your opening? And at what point, if it wasn't, did that become the opening?
First of all, it's 2:17 with credits. It's actually not.
Pardon me.
Everyone is talking about how long it is. It's just like, for the love of God, that's, you want to pay for it, and you want your money's
So
worth or not.
2:14, 2:14.
A little bit less than that. I think it's 2:10 when you take out the credit.
All right, so we were talking about the opening scene, and we were talking about you know, starting your movie from that point forward. You know, Pete gave a great performance, and it's interesting to see how you recover from something like that. So please continue about starting the movie off with that scene, and if there was another scene that was in place of it before you came up with that.
Well, it was just that it was a scene that we thought about because we wanted to. There were different versions that, and this is something Judd and I specifically spoke about a lot, that we really wanted to show the character realistically breaking down. That we needed to show that this is someone who can't process his emotions. And the idea to put it, and it was the idea to put the suicide, not attempt, but that's not, he almost does it in the movie. I believe was a suggestion by Leslie Mann. I believe that was her. She's brilliant. That was her idea, which was like, all of us were like, oh my God, that's so much better. You know, to put that at the beginning, just be like, because it's better that it's not about stimuli. It's better that it's like, this is the baseline of who this person is. Someone who is almost ambivalent to his own survival. And
Yeah,
that's
I mean,
sort of where the character starts.
you know, also people, it's been widely reported, and I'm not trying to get into any tabloid stuff whatsoever, but it's a known fact that drugs have been in the past part of Pete's life. And this character of Scott is referred to a million times by Ray, the guy dating his mom in the movie, as a drug addict. You know, that's what he keeps calling him as shorthand. But there isn't really evidence in the movie that he's doing much besides getting high, occasionally smoking pot. Was there ever any more of a deep drug focus in the movie beyond the kind of recreational use that we see now? I know that,
No,
again, that would make it
because
less of a comedy and more of a drama, him battling drug addiction. I'm just curious how it played in other drafts.
oh, not at all. Actually, we never even thought about the idea of Pete's character doing more than smoking weed, because that's what Pete does.
Okay.
Pete doesn't do hard drugs. Pete smoked a lot of weed. You know, like, I remember when Pete went to rehab for it, you know, I kind of told him, I was like, listen, you know, people are going to assume you're on something harder than weed because they don't understand how much weed we're talking about. And
Count me as one of those people, by the way.
yeah, no, I understand that. Like, it's actually a misconception I've had to explain to people before, because, you know, people, they see him physically, and that, you know, sometimes his Crohn's disease does cause him to be much paler and have darker eyes because of the anemia that comes with Crohn's disease. So people make their own assumptions, but no, Pete's drug of choice has been weed. You know, aside from doing like mushrooms once in a while, he doesn't do hard drugs. And, you know, it's funny because it's like, I remember saying to him, literally at the time, I was like, you know, people, when you say, I was like, whenever you refer to drugs and you mean weed, everyone thinks you mean, because a lot of people don't even acknowledge the idea that weed is a drug, which it is. And, you know, I like it too, but it's still a drug.
Well, and it has
Uh,
addictive elements that can happen. So it does make sense that he could go to rehab for it, because for some people it could be overused.
Yeah, but I also, like, you know, when he went to rehab for weed, that wasn't just about weed. That was about, you know, him just, you know, at the time, you know, dealing with his mental health and
Yeah.
needing a break and needing to address certain things. And, you know, it could have manifested a different way. But, you know, he's smoking a lot of weed, and we assume it wasn't helping. And he's been sober for a little while now, and seeing how, you know, how good it seems to be for him makes us think that that's true. That yeah, maybe the self-medication with weed, because he already had to be on it for his Crohn's. You know, his doctor needs him to smoke weed, and then he's also medicating with weed for you know, the depression that comes with, you know, what he's dealing with. So uh, it's funny though that I realized as you were speaking, like, oh, he's assuming it was more, and it's like, It's kind of embarrassing that it was just weed.
Not at all. I mean, thank you for the correction. That's really good to
But
know, actually.
it's funny how many people like that's what the impression they got. But I mean, I certainly don't want him to try harder drugs. Uh,
No, me neither. And actually putting in the perspective of the Crohn's disease makes complete sense. I'm interested earlier on in your drafts and working with Judd. It's always interesting to hear about left turns, scenes that you were really stuck on that you thought were going to be great set pieces, great scenes in the movie that just completely never made it, were never filmed. So I'm not even talking about deleted scenes, but I'm talking about early iterations of ideas that the movie could have gone like in a direction of that it would be fun to hear about. So are there any that come to mind in that respect?
I definitely initially pitched something that was a little bit closer to Boogie Nights, of the idea of robbing a drug dealer. It wouldn't have been in
Rather
practice
than
like
the
Boogie
pharmacy,
Nights.
you mean?
Yeah, yeah. I originally pitched a whole thing about like just the idea that we're seeing Pete and that his friend that his friend Oscar is going to a place he shouldn't, and that he ends up doing things, and which is funny because I was like, yeah, actually that's funny. Originally the name was Oscar, that's why I was thinking that. But he's
What was
but
the
yeah.
scene? Put us in the place of it.
Oh no,
How
I
was it
wanted
close
to
to
have a
Boogie
scene where
Nights?
Ricky Velez's character, they're buying weed from somebody, and he's like paying too close attention to where the guy keeps his stuff, and they're saying like, we can do this and all this stuff, where it's just like, no, we should not do that at all. And just that you see this like ambition that Ricky has that he shouldn't have. There was also a scene that I really wish had gotten in the movie, of when Igor gets out of prison and he does like an improvised rap song to his phone with his new girlfriend Carla, and I shot him like rapping to himself like in front of the prison in like a very dumb way. That was really fun. I mean, yeah, it's hard to me even remember because there were just so many things, so many generations of things that we considered. There was definitely a scene that would have been really fun. It was just one of those things that just we kind of lost, where there was going to be like a rival of Pete's, who like he every time they go to play basketball, him and his asshole buddy are there too, and they're always talking shit to Pete. And one of the things that really pisses Pete off is that the guy likes to always bring up that both of his parents died tragically, and it was just like a real like everything, you got to do everything better, huh?
That's crazy, and that would have been a bummer. Hey, I'm jumping in really quick to let you know that we would love your support for Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. And if you act now, see that cheesy commercial, act now, you could save $5 off a 1-year subscription. All you got to do is use coupon code SAVE5 to save $5 at backstory.net during your checkout, and you'll get access to our current issue. You'll get access to the last year's worth of issues in our archive. And we will be expanding our archive over time to include even older issues, but right now it's the last year's worth. And you'll also be helping us prepare for issue 42, which is going to be our new issue that we've done over these times during COVID and everything else. And it's our kind of social distance issue, but there's going to be a lot of great stuff in it that we're going to continue adding to for a while once it goes live. Some of the articles I've honest to God been working on for over 5 years that I have finally gotten in place. So I'm very excited for you to see what we have in store for you in issue 42, our new issue. We can't do it without your help. So your support means everything to us. If you've never read Backstory before, you could read us on a desktop or a laptop at backstory.net, or you could use your credentials from backstory.net to log in on an iPad and read us there as well. We prefer, if you're going to subscribe, that you get your subscription at backstory.net and then go on to the iPad, because that keeps things staying with us a bit more. But we have a lot of great things in store for you. We really appreciate your support. And without any further ado, let's get back to our chat with Dave about his debut feature film, The King of Staten Island. Since you brought up the scene with them doing the drug heist, like, they're getting sent to prison. That's not really what was expected coming into this movie. And I always love the unexpected. So what in your mind did that scene represent, in which his group of friends was disbanded? Often in a coming of age story, sometimes people are running with a bad group that they realize they just need to get away from. And in this one, rather than him exiting the the group exited from him by being sent to prison. So it was an interesting switch up.
I mean, the whole idea of that was just that, things have consequences and that you can't just tread water living like this. Things go bad, and that when you ignore a problem, it festers. And, I mean, originally we had, a lot of different ideas. I mean, originally Igor was going to be this really tall guy who was just stupid. Like that was the first iteration of the character. And Lou's character um, was going to be like the smart one who is sort of slumming it with these dumb losers because he doesn't want to, you know, he doesn't want to actually his potential, but and so like things changed a lot, but the idea was just that it was just supposed to be one of those dumb things where like you spend too long just not really taking care of your own, world, and you eventually kind of fall. And I don't, that's sort of like, I don't know if that's the right way to describe it, but it was about the stakes being necessary and about the idea that we have to see, we have to show his character recognizing how dangerous the path he's on is. And how, even though it's not like he's the good guy there, he's just one of them. He just got lucky.
I almost thought that the rival, the tattoo artist that he wanted to intern for or whatever was maybe going to become an antagonist in the movie. But, at the same time, that could have been a trope as well. So it was good that, life was more Pete's antagonist, and kind of Pete was Pete's antagonist for most of the movie. And that's definitely the trope of a good coming of age story. What were the challenges that you felt writing in an ensemble piece? Because you had his group of friends. You had Margie, his mom, Clara's sister. You had Ray, obviously the man dating his mom. A lot of characters, and sometimes just tracking an ensemble can be, a lot of work in itself to make sure that the characters have their moments, their payoffs, while at the same time servicing the protagonist who doesn't really have an antagonist. So tell us some of the challenges of ensemble writing and what you learned with Judd doing that, because he is a master for ensemble pieces.
In many ways, I felt like the ensemble thing wasn't so difficult because we didn't have to write for anyone. If any one character wasn't, working, we just get rid of them. There was a character, I believe, named Rosie, that we had that changed, that originally was going to be an older guy, and then we but things just kept changing, so that it ended up being incorporated into other characters. But there was just a lot where you just kind of, you're building a story and you're never really forced to keep anyone. So it just, if a character wasn't working, we just wouldn't use them. It's not like we went into it saying, all right, every one of these people has to score. It's not like we went into like Endgame where they have like 100 characters and they have to make sure each one of them gets the right moment. We just knew what we wanted to happen, and we knew that we could hire people who could pull it off, basically.
Yeah, and also obviously Endgame had years to get those moments ingrained, and previous material to build on, and you're building on only your movie. So
Right.
that's the challenge, obviously, for ensemble writing, not based on previous material. What about Kelsey, his relationship with Kelsey, his girlfriend? It was interesting to see where it went, and she was a very good reminder of the real life toll that Scott's character would, that Pete's character Scott would have on people in his life, beyond just being a grind for his mom and his sister. She was dedicating time and energy towards Scott and was seeing nothing in return. So that was kind of an interesting path to go down.
Yeah, that was, I mean, we really owed a lot to Belle for just being such a insanely good actor. I mean, her audition, I was in the room for that, was shocking. She was so goddamn good. I mean, she's British, and she did the best Staten Island accent of any American actress that we auditioned. So the thing about Kelsey was, we just sort of knew that a romantic relationship was a big part of explaining what's going on with Pete, and that he's aware of how much of an undertaking dating him is, and how not fun it can be for someone who doesn't understand why he's behaving a certain way. And it was just, a relationship was a good way of exploring the psyche of someone like that, because he has to be more vulnerable with someone he's with physically, and it's also going to create more problems for him. I just think it was just about sort of, that was a good way of exploring, you know, what's going on with this guy, and specifically more than anything, how to really show what he needed to improve on and what he needed to be aware of. And, you know, that for me, I wrote a lot of those parts, you know, as well as everyone else. But like a lot of that for me was because I've been in relationships that had similar issues. I've been there with Pete when he's had issues with relationships, just like I've had relationships with women who had similar problems to Pete's, actually. So it sort of gave me a little bit of a unique perspective, and it was able to utilize things that I've been thinking about for a long time.
In the trailer, we kind of see Ray a little bit of as an antagonist, but it's also clear that he's going to be a good influence on Pete as well. And you know, it's no new trope to say that, you know, the guy that's dating the divorced mom or the widower is kind of going to be, you know, come under suspicion from, you know, the kids as being somebody that's an outsider that they need to get rid of. Here was interesting because you formed a delicate balance, because Ray comes into the movie really hard. You know, he is screaming in the doorway that his son was tattooed by Pete, and he's rightly angry at such a thing being done. And then he kind of becomes a nice guy for the rest of the movie until Scott's character goes and does an investigation on him and finds out that he was a day trader and that he's actively trying not to do childcare and things that don't make Ray look so good. I'm curious how you kind of form that delicate balance to show both a good and a bad side to Ray, in which ultimately the good side is what shines through, even though, by the way, he still might be a train wreck of a person for Margie to date. It's not clear by the end of the movie, and I'm not entirely sure you wanted to even bother definitively answering that question.
Well, if Margie wanted to be with a guy who wasn't a train wreck, then she would be. Clearly, she has a type. Clearly, Margie likes a certain kind of guy. And I think that it's pretty clear to me at the end of this movie that Margie and Ray are going to get married.
Okay.
To me, anyway. It's not perfect, but the whole idea is that, you know, Ray's a flawed person too. But more so, Ray serves as the the hard rain of reality coming down on Pete. And that, you know, Ray's character is able to, it's just for someone who is such a house of cards of emotion, for someone to bulldoze that like Ray does, it's very much about what David Milch talks about creating environments and then throwing monkey wrenches into them.
That makes sense. Obviously, Judd Apatow is somebody that all comedians would just love to write with. Now that we're in the spoiler section, are there any notes or any part of his process that you found unique that really were eye-opening, where he showed you a different way to a scene that just kind of wasn't on your radar, or was part of his creative process that is something that you'll try and now adapt to your own creative process?
I mean, just in general, the ability to really to have the trust in the material to let it breathe and let the actors feel it out, and to just, there's a certain amount of just like, that's the thing, he has a lot of trust in his actors. He's very he the way that he keeps things organic, like just the fact that we didn't take that many takes, he wants everything to be fresh and real. Whereas when I've directed, I will make you say the same goddamn thing over and over again until I get exactly what I want. You know, that's the, I think the difference. And I definitely learned a lot about just the organic nature of like a holistic story, just that you have to really look at it, it's not pieces, it's one giant thing that you have to sort of, all these, you know, intangibles at once, you have to balance them in your head. It's really nice seeing the way that he's able to just, that there's, it's, in order to make an original movie, you have to take weird chances. And I saw the way he was willing to do that, the way he was able to just say, yeah, I think this all comes together. I think this all tells the story I want.
What percentage would you say of the performances in the movie were improvised? I mean, people go back and forth a lot. I know that from interviewing Apatow in the past, and it's been a little while, he's very dogmatic about making sure that the iteration of the script that is in the production draft is at least gone through once, and then he allows a bunch of alt takes and throws improv ideas from behind the camera. Is that what you were finding? And what percentage would you say of the final film, if so, was actually improvised?
I mean, I have no idea what percentage. I honestly couldn't tell you. It would be, It'd be too difficult to figure that out
Okay.
because, like I said, the script changed so much, and like you have to understand, first there's the scripted version, which we are going to do, and then there's all the stuff that me, as well as Judah and Ricky, were writing and pitching to them, and then, you would hear, after this, you would just hear Judd yell something that we wrote or that was his own idea, say, well, say this, that, and just like he would just yell the dialogue, and you're yelling it back, you're saying it back, just to kind of, so like that's not really improvising, that's just us using an alt, and then at the same time letting actors stretch their legs. But that was also sort of the domain of certain actors more than others. Stand-ups are going to be a little bit more comfortable uh changing dialogue in the moment, and I would say by far the person who improvised the most of dialogue you saw percentage-wise was Pete. But Pete's also a writer. So Pete knew the material well enough that he knew exactly how to improvise and keep the exact emotional space it needs to be. And the same is true with Bill, who was such a incredible professional as an actor, but able to still utilize all his instincts as a stand-up. And that's why he just would find just ways of making every little moment funnier. His timing was so perfect because when you have that magical kind of mix of being like a really, really seasoned stand-up, but also someone who's got a talent and a discipline to really take acting seriously.
I'm curious, were there any major rewrites during production? Anything that kind of needed to be retooled once you saw how the movie was shaping up? Or reshoots for that matter?
No, there were never any reshoots I can think of. It was more just every day was rewriting. Every weekend
Okay.
was looking at what we're doing this week and looking at it with new eyes and trying to adapt it and make sure that everything was happening. But it wasn't like it was because of what's been so far, we need to change this. It was just more like every scene is its own scene, and every scene needs to have constant revision and constantly keeping it fresh and just making sure that it feels right in the moment. Because some things just don't. Some things look right on paper and they don't translate. It's very hard to predict. It's very hard to control. So yeah, there was nothing like that, like a specific. The only time I think we ever reshot something was for technical reasons.
Okay. It seems like the end of Act Two is Pete and Ray being kicked out of the house. And so that leaves a very reformative Act Three where characters are reflexive, they're kind of finding their ways. What gave you that idea for a third act, especially the idea of Pete crashing at the firehouse the way he does because he basically ends up de facto homeless?
I mean, I don't know if I can give you an exact reason why it happens that way, but it's really about allowing the character to finally process an entire lifetime of grief and hangups about his dad, and having avoided the firehouse and having it allows him to kind of get over what's been in his own way, which is not really knowing how to feel about his dad and about firemen, and just giving him an opportunity to be able to grow and kind of get out of his own way using that moment. And that the firehouse allowed him to finally be somewhat responsible, but also just finally get out of his own comfort zone and get out of his basement kind of situation. And that he needed to the character needed to forgive his dad, who's not around, but he, and that was a big part of what this is that, he loves this person so much, and he's mad that he put him in harm's way, and because that's what growing up Pete really felt.
And,
He
and it
did
was a good
not
way
know
for
how to
him to
process
become,
that.
yeah, it was good for him to become closer to Ray as well. So it worked in that respect. I'm curious, was there ever an ending that you guys considered where he joins the fire department?
No.
Because I could see your endings going a lot of different ways. Let's talk about that for a moment. The ending wraps up pretty nicely and is completely the opposite of the beginning where he's looking to end his life. So it needs to go in that direction, obviously. But, he
I
does kind
considered
of tie up his relationship with Kelsey pretty neatly. He seems to be bright about his future, I guess, trying, tattooing on his own and going through the rigmarole that he's going to have to. But I'm curious, how did you shape your ending? Like tell us about that process.
Well, this ending ended up being much more open-ended than we intended. We we originally there were going to be endings that I involved uh, Pete getting into art school and simply working a regular job and doing the disciplined work of becoming a better artist. There was also the idea that he would start working at the kindergarten that you saw him at, that he would start working with kids and art because it would be using what he's actually capable of and good at, because we didn't want it to be the last thing we wanted was to make it seem like this is just a problem you can get over and fix. And it's not. It's just about just the incremental ability to want to be better, to start doing the work. And we just felt like we didn't need that. I can tell you one thing I wrote that didn't make it in because it just wasn't, because it was just too silly. But what I would have loved, if I pitched an idea early where the last scene was the whole family at breakfast, and we see that Pete has moved back home, but he's worked and he's going to school, he's being responsible, and then his sister Claire, who is of course home from college, she sits down trying to look like she's not still really, really drunk from the night before, and that she's just sort of trying to hold it together, and Pete's the one who's the kind of snickering at her for being such a mess, and then some 50-year-old guy comes out of her room.
That's really funny.
Because it would just imply, because the whole idea for me was that it's almost that kind of ending with a question mark, because then it would be like, because the idea for me that with having her be with a guy who's too old for her, that it would be almost like an old version of Pete was,
because now she has daddy issues, basically.
Right, now she's the one who's got to deal with her dad.
That's really funny. I love the stab guy. Because that's
Thank you.
At that point in the movie, I thought that Pete was maybe going to end up, joining the firemen because of how well he handles that trial by fire of just, helping someone in need. Because firemen work with paramedics; they're not always just doing fires. And I thought that was a good scene that was very funny, and it was coming pretty much at the right place with that guy just giving every excuse possible as to what happened to him, and then they all wind up.
Yeah, Action Bronson. Yeah.
Yeah.
The rapper Action Bronson. Like I said, that was the scene that I kind of wrote very early on, and that was basically the least tooled with scene. It was like, honestly, the original version of this movie, that when I said we had all these different generations, that's the one scene that was in my original version and made it all the way to the end. And it was just really fun. It was just, it was a math equation. It was like, how do we get the three of them in a room together? How do we give Pete the kind of moment of showing that he's grown? Like, it was just a lot of things. And the idea that, like, Action Bronson is kind of supposed to be a cautionary tale for Pete as well. In the description of him was simply aging white rapper before we cast anyone.
Somebody that could have ended up in the dungeon.
Right. Just like it was age. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That was the idea. Just someone that Pete would be able to look at and be like, well, at least I didn't end up like this guy. Sort of a cautionary tale. Like, I remember when Jason Mantzoukas was one of the first people I thought of, like, who could really, he's one of my favorite actors. I remember thinking like what would, that he was one of the first people I thought of for that. But we ended up auditioning a lot of people, and Action just, we wanted it to be someone you didn't see coming. And I think the only thing with Jason was that, like, he's such a brilliant comedic actor that I think that if he was the character, you'd see too much coming, because you just know what he does so well, that with Action Bronson as a non-actor, then you could really, there's more of a surprise there. There's more of a weirdness and reality to it. Even though now I desperately want to write a movie with Jason Mantzoukas.
You should. Well, I know we're running out of time. One of the things that was cathartic in the movie that was really interesting was the actual fire scene when Ray puts out a fire and Scott is there to watch. And
yeah, that was crazy. I mean, we had to go through fireman training. I mean, I didn't, of course, but everyone who's playing a fireman had to go through, like, real training.
And Steve Buscemi obviously already has the training, so that was good.
Oh, yeah. And multiple firemen in that movie are real firemen. A lot of the people we hired, we specifically said, let's hire actors who are also real firefighters, because that, for a lot of firefighters, they have a side hustle. They do construction, or they do, that was another scene that was cut, the construction scene. They do acting. One of the actors, like one of the firefighters, was Scott Davidson's friend when he was a firefighter, who was the actor of the precinct.
That's
That was
fascinating.
John Sorrentino. He was, and you'll see him in the movie. He's one of the older firemen in the house, and he, you know, Pete's dad in the '80s called him Hairman as a reference to He-Man, because in the '80s he had like one of those giant '80s hair,
Maine.
Yeah.
Well, so what was your toughest scene? I think that's a good place to kind of wrap this up. What was the scene that you kept coming back to again and again, and it was tough to crack? And tell us how you rose to the creative challenge of getting through it.
I don't know if there was a specific scene that was like that. It was more just trying to figure out how this could end, how this could satisfyingly and not unfairly have a sense of closure for this character who you desperately, because at the same time, it was so important that we did not disrespect the idea that, people with mental illness, people with BPD, people with post-traumatic stress, people with these issues, it's not just, you don't just figure out what's wrong with you and you get better. It's not just about having these big moments. It was about being like, how can we show that he's grown without insulting the audience? And that's why we had so many different ideas of what could be the redemption moment, what could be our ending moment to know that he's gonna be okay. It's just not gonna be easy.
I forgot to ask earlier, so I guess it would be a toughest question because we skipped on it a little. The runtime. I'm curious how conscious you guys were of the runtime. I'm not complaining by any means. Like it's kind of good when you could fall in with characters for a while, and especially this day and age when so many of us are quarantining. Longer form media is even more acceptable. It gives you that binge feeling. But I'm curious what you learned through the editing process, because that's how you see your film shaped and you realize some of the scenes you didn't need, and also about runtime.
Well, I mean, we wrote this without thinking about runtime at all. We just knew that we were writing more material than we needed because we were intending on just using the best of it. So I didn't really, I mean, I wasn't in the editing room as a writer. I wasn't there every day. I just got to see the different versions that were coming out. So, I've edited a lot myself personally. All my other projects I edited myself, and I've edited for other people because that's what my living for a while was. I learned to do everything myself and then do it for people who don't want to do that. If you need help, you don't know how to do sound, I'll do your sound. Because I, for lack of money, learned to do every single thing. But with our editing process, it just became a thing where you watch it and you see that, people could say, well, it's long. And then you say, right, it is long, but is there anything that could be cut from this that would not suffer more than the length? And the first version of the movie was 2.5 hours. And then we cut it down to 2:15. And the difference in how the audience reacted to it between those was marked. It was like, oh, we figured out, because it was just about showing the audience and saying, all right, which parts are the best? That's like what you do with test audiences. You kind of want fresh eyes on something. So, I mean, I think that, look, people seem to say that about all of Judd's movies, that, they're long, but that's how Judd makes movies. And it's too easy to say that, that there's anything you could cut that wouldn't cause it to suffer and just wouldn't work,
I'm curious if you were there for the test screenings, because I remember in
Yeah.
one of my first interviews with Apatow, I was brought to like one of the test screenings too. And it was really fascinating because as a podcaster, I'd been using Zoom sound devices. And I was sitting in the theater and I noticed that there was like a C-stand with a Zoom sound device taped on it. And a sound team was actually rigging it up so that Apatow could track like where the laughs were hitting in this particular cut of the film, and then would take those sound recordings from other test screenings to see if the laughs were still hitting even when scenes had been moved around. And I thought it was a very pragmatic way to track different cuts. And I'm just curious if you were a part of the testing process for this, and if
Yeah.
there was anything you learned.
Yeah, no, I got to sit in these giant theaters and see a crowd react. And that was really, especially since we ended up not being able to have a theatrical release because of the coronavirus. I'm very happy that I got to see that and got to see a whole crowd react and laugh at jokes and keeping score of whose jokes were getting the most laughs. So that was really fun. And yeah, you learn a lot. I mean, you get to sit there and watch people talk about it and see what they think. And that was really cool. And yeah, I mean, that's one of the most important things. What are they laughing at? Because that's how you decide what's going to be in the commercial, basically.
Was there something that you remember that surprised you that you really just had to lose, that you were hanging on to, or a very specific lesson you could mention from a test screening?
Not really. I think that like, it's more about the positives where you're just like, there's certain things where it's like, I really hope they get like this. Like, there's just certain moments where like, if they don't laugh at this moment, then this is a failed joke. Like, for example, Ruby Tattoos Day. I was extremely proud of that line. And I was like, and there was a version where that wasn't in the movie. And I was like, that has to be in the movie. That really has to be in it. And when I was in the theater, that was one of the biggest laughs, just when he's just sort of nonchalant, like, yeah, Ruby Tattoos Day. And I was like, see, yeah, I told you that needs to be in there.
What's next? What are you working on next that we should be aware of?
Well, most things you're not really allowed to talk about, at early stages, but there's some things. Like I said, there was a Triumph thing that will be coming out any day now.
Good.
That I think people really like. I think it isn't out yet, but it will be. It's got a lot of very famous people in it also. And I'm just sort of figuring out what else I'm working on. We have a little project with HBO Max right now. We also have a script that.
When you say we, you mean you and Pete?
Yeah. We also have a script that we're going to start working on for another project that we have a lot of legal stuff to work out before that can start, but should be getting underway soon. So that's pretty cool. But yeah, there's definitely things I want to do. You got to really think about it. I'm considering a lot of things because I really want to write something that I'm really into, and I really want to write something that's mine. I've never really gotten to do that. I've always sort of been a hired gun as a writer, and we've pitched a lot of things, that were more or less my ideas, but I really want to do something where I'm more the central point of the writing, because this was I'm very proud of the work I did, but this was Judd driving the ship, and it was Pete's story. So I was there to serve those things.
And so now you want to centralize it on just, a story that interests you. That totally makes sense, of course.
Yeah, not that I mean, I love this story too. I think it's time for me to figure out what I can do.
Great. Well, you've been very generous with your time. I dug the movie, and I hope a lot of people see it. Thanks again for hanging out and talking about it. Thanks, Dave. Can't wait to see what you do next.
You like the movie?
Yeah, it was fun to watch.
Okay, good.
It's a comedy. It better be fun to watch.
Good. Thank God.
Well, I can't wait to have you back on the show, man. Thanks again for your time.
Thank you so much, Jeff. I really appreciate it.
And that's how the Q&A went down. Special thanks again to co-writer Dave Sirus for coming down and being so generous with his time to talk about his debut feature film, The King of Staten Island, which, as you know, has been released on VOD. So no matter where you're tuning in, you should be able to get it in the convenience of your own home and check it out as a great escape and a very entertaining movie to see while you're hanging out at home and hopefully social distancing from your friends, but still keeping in touch and talking to them about everything that you liked in the movie and the ideas that it brings up for you and inspires in you. Without a doubt, while you're surfing around online, I hope you'll check out Backstory Magazine. You can find us, as always, over at backstory.net, and you could use coupon code SAVE5 to save $5 off a subscription for 1 year. And with a subscription for 1 year, you'll get access to our complete archive of the past year. We're also adding further years back issues to it as time goes on, and you will be supporting us as we begin to put together and release quite soon issue 42, which will be our new issue that we've put together during these wild times in history as we're all stuck in the middle of this pandemic together, hopefully helping each other out and getting through it as best as we can. Your support means everything to us. So subscribing, using the coupon, telling your friends about it, now is definitely the time to do it if you've been a longtime supporter of this podcast. And speaking of the podcast, you could watch the Zoomcast, the video of it, if you didn't know that. If you're listening in iTunes or Spotify, if you look up Backstory Magazine's YouTube page, you could actually see us there as we do the Zoomcast live. So it's a way to watch it rather than just listen to it if you want. And that's basically what we have going. Obviously, the Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith is a copyright of Unlikely Films Incorporated in 2020, all rights reserved. And I forgot to mention earlier, if you want to test drive Backstory Magazine, you can read a free issue over at backstory.net. So it's a great way to see what we're all about if you've never experienced us before. Nonetheless, I'm Jeff Goldsmith, the host of the Q&A, thanking you for tuning in and telling you to stay out of trouble. Till next week.